Hello and welcome back to Miniverse. Now recently I've been so hyped for the new Star Wars Jedi Survivor game, so to ease my excitement I made this diorama. So I started by cutting up some XPS foam with my trusty hot wire cutter, making sure to get an even cut all around the base, which, yeah, I didn't do that. When planning out this diorama, I knew I wanted a small rock face with one of those rope hoarding things. You know those things in games that let you skip parts of the map once you progress enough in the game. Anyway, we'll get to that later. So after burning myself with some hot glue, I made this neat little mound using offcuts of XPS foam and some hot glue. And oh yes! Some exciting news which isn't news or exciting. I'll be writing down all the paints I used in the description with some cheeky little links, so make sure to check that out. And to make the base of the diorama look nicer, we're going to stick on some wooden veneer. For this I'm using pine veneer, which I probably wouldn't recommend. Look for a harder wood, and some double-sided sticky tape. So a great way to get the clay to stick to the foam is to make all of these little holes so that the clay can grab onto it. And for this I'm going to be using air drying clay, as you can manipulate it with water and it only takes a few hours to dry rock hard. So late last year I bought some of these BX Commando droids, but I never really had any idea what to do with them. So to my amazement, they are actually in the game, and they have this really interesting and cool paint scheme, which features a lot of off-whites and browns, so let's give it a try. So for the base coat I use an off-white and ivory, or just some general yellowish mixed with some white. And I covered most of the armour panels. I then painted segments in black metal just to mix it up a bit. The paint scheme is actually quite fun, as there's not just one fixed theme through all of them like the stereotypical B1 battle droid. Literally, if you look at any of the reference images, they all have individual unique patterns, so it's quite a fun way to get creative and try some new things out. So with this one I gave him some metal legs and other accents. And for the brown I used Vallejo Rust. Now onto some good old black wash. I used an enamel wash so that I can get rid of any of the wash afterwards and keep it in the recesses and shadows. And as you can see, this bottle is way too hard to open. However, once the wash is removed, I added some highlights simply by adding some more off-white into any of the paint mixtures. And for the sword, I flicked some different purples around, then added a wash. And back to the diorama. I used the cover for the back of a remote control for this platform. I then started to glue on some plaster rocks on top to make the rock face look a little bit less like foam. Hot glue is also a great way to fill in any gaps, as you get a lot of volume for what it is, and it obviously sticks to stuff. Now, let's move on to our second clay of the day, VMS Smart Mud 2.0. This is one of my favourite clays, as it resembles mud really well. Out of all the tips I have, just make sure to keep wiping your fingers and keep them clean, otherwise they'll literally just stick to your finger and not the diorama. To make this dirt look a little bit more like dirt, I sprinkled on some cocoa fibre, sand and small rocks all over the diorama. So I started with the base coat of PVA glue, then soaked in isopropyl alcohol to then add one final last layer of glue. The reason being it will seep into the clay and glue any of the little extra little tidbits to the diorama. Now onto the man himself, Cal Kestis. I ended up painting him in really neutral colours, like green browns for his trousers and a nice cream top. I also added a lovely blue chest plate. I then used some thinned down skeleton Horde contrast paint for some subtle shading. Oh, and ignore his face, I was having a literal nightmare trying to paint it, so I'm going to have to skip that part today. So after painting his lightsaber, it's time to return back to the rocks. So I kneaded up some milliput together and then stuck it in between all of the plaster rocks. I then used tweezers and a really hard brush stippling to recreate some rock texture and blend it in. And the next part was really fun. So I made this cool little winch system using old parts from a tank. I like to think of a little contraption that the chain goes up and down, and that's the bit in the game where you slash it with your lightsaber, it falls down, and you don't have to spend an hour running back and forth. Finally, it's painting time. After a zenithal highlight, I base coated it in Cygor Brown for that beautiful earthy tones. I then highlighted all the dirt with steel Legion Drab. For the rocks, I used petroleum grey in a wash consistency. And I also added some little bits of colour, like some yellows, for some extra variety in it. And then I finished up the rocks with a nice little dry brush of some light grey. Then I painted the little contraption which leads us to sticking down all of the minis. With the mini stuck down, I then stuck on their chain. I then used some little bushes I made for another diorama quite a long time ago, and thankfully they're still hanging around. And there you have it. There's still a lot I'd like to do to this, but hey, it's done and that's all that matters for now. If you liked the video, please make sure to give it a cheeky like, and also a cheeky sub if you're not sub below. And if you're wondering how I made those bushes, click on that video to the bottom left of the screen. As always, I've been Reese, and I'll catch you on the next one.